There was a man named Billy who lived alone in a large home with multiple floors, his bedroom being on the top floor. Billy lay on his bed, ready to sleep. But just as his eyes began to close so he could drift off, he heard a blood-curdling scream coming from what sounded like the basement. The scream seemed to echo across the walls of the house. He sprang up out of bed and made his way to the basement staircase. He turned on the light, which illuminated just below the last step, and peered down. It was dark and quiet. Feeling that he may have just been hearing things and not really wanting to go down to the unfinished basement in his pajamas, Billy went back upstairs to go to bed. However, upon putting his head on the pillow, he once again heard the agonizing scream echoing through the walls. Billy once again sprang up and ran to the basement stairs, flicking on the light. He took one step down the stairs to try to peer into the darkness below. At the corner of his eye, he could have sworn he saw some movement, but when he shifted his gaze, it was gone. "I really must get more sleep," Billy said to himself. Surely he must have been hallucinating. He made his way up to bed for a second time. But once again he was interrupted by the scream. He stormed down to the basement one more time, determined to get to the bottom of whatever was going on. He went down to the stairs and stood on the landing, peering into the darkness. He stood there for a moment, and all was quiet. All of a sudden he saw a grotesque humanoid-looking figure, with black eyes and a pale face, rise up next to him from the shadows. As it opened its mouth wide, revealing rows and rows of sharp yellow teeth that descended upon him, Billy let out a loud, agonizing, blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house as the creature devoured him whole. There was a storm blowing through the area, and Samantha was alone in the house with her dog, Bruno. Her parents and her brother were out running errands, but they'd be home any minute. Samantha was watching television with Bruno, who was quivering under the couch. He always got afraid during storms like this. Samantha lazily watched television while Bruno licked her hand from under the couch. Suddenly she heard a thump coming from the other room. She peered into the other room, searching for a shadow or any indication of an intruder, but she saw nothing. All of a sudden, the lights flickered and turned off. She heard another thump, this time coming from the room opposite her. Now Samantha was panicking. What if an intruder was in the house? What would she do? She looked around frantically from room to room as the storm raged on outside. She heard another thump, this time sounding like it was coming from the floor above her. With the house almost completely dark, it was difficult to see what was going on around her. Samantha curled up into a ball on the couch and closed her eyes. All of a sudden, she heard the door open, followed by the sounds of her parents. She opened her eyes. The lights were back on and the storm had subsided. She breathed a sigh of relief as her parents and brother walked into the house, followed by Bruno. They had taken him to the vet today. Samantha suddenly got a sick feeling in the pit of her stomach as she watched her family enter. She didn't notice as a hand slowly slid out from under the couch towards her. "And if you leave your tooth under the pillow," John's mom said, "then she'll leave you some money." John smiled as he took his tooth out of his mom's hand. He placed it carefully underneath his pillow. His mother said goodnight and finished tucking him in before turning out the light. The next morning, John woke up and, sure enough, he saw $1 under his pillow. He was ecstatic. He couldn't believe such a being existed, one that would give him money for such a useless object. He couldn't stop talking about it all day, right up until his mom tucked him in that night. She said goodnight to him once again and turned off the light to allow him to sleep. The next morning, John's mother went to go wake him up for school when she discovered a horrifying sight. John lay on the bed, his head and mouth covered in blood. In one hand was his father's work pliers. In his other hand was a $20 bill. These past few years. One of the main reasons I signed up for Shudder was the 2019 horror anthology series Creepshow, which is technically a continuation of the horror movies of the same name. I very much am a sucker for anthology-type horror movies and shows. If it's in anthology format, I'll almost always give it a chance, and I also tend to be a lot more forgiving when internally reviewing these types of shows and movies. I enjoyed the VHS series. Yes, I enjoyed all 3 of them. I know they weren't beacons of cinema or anything, but I was entertained by every installment in the series. I also like the ABCs of Death series, Trick or Treat, All Hallows Eve, which is a very underrated horror anthology movie.